Lillian Gray pressed her palm flat against her side and swallowed the scream before it reached her lips. 3 cracked ribs. 1 stagecoach ride from Philadelphia to Montana. 1,800 miles of every rut and rock in the road punishing her for surviving. She told herself she could do this. She told herself she was not afraid. Then the door swung open and a man's hand appeared to help her down, and her entire body went rigid with terror. If you're watching from your city, drop it in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and stay with me until the very end. The stagecoach had been rolling since before dawn, and by the time it shuddered to a stop in the middle of Montana City's main street, Lillian Gray had bitten through the inside of her cheek twice just to keep from making a sound. She sat perfectly still while the other passengers shifted and gathered their things. A woman across from her stout, cheerful smelling of rosewater smiled and said something about the mountains being beautiful this time of year. Lillian smiled back. She had no idea what she said in response. Her entire world had narrowed to the 3 inches of space between her right arm and her side, and the fire that lived inside that space. Don't move too fast. Don't breathe too deep. Don't let anyone see. She had been practicing those 3 rules for 6 weeks. When the door finally opened and the driver extended his hand, Lillian reached for it with her left arm, slowly, deliberately, and stepped down onto the street of Montana City, Montana, in the autumn of 1878 as a woman arriving to meet the man she had agreed to marry. She had never seen his face. She knew his name, Xander Nash. She knew he ran a cattle ranch 12 miles east of town. She knew he was 34 years old and had been widowed once, same as her, though the similarities between their losses she suspected were not similarities at all. What she did not know was whether he was a man like Thomas. That was the only question that mattered now. The street was busier than she expected. A feed store to her left, a post office with a sagging porch on her right, a woman beating dust from a rug in an upper window, a boy chasing a dog between wagon wheels. It smelled like horses and fresh-cut lumber, and something faintly sweet she couldn't place. Montana City. Her second chance. Or her last. She stood beside her single trunk and waited. She had written to the matchmaker agency in June. By August, she had exchanged 2 letters with Xander Nash. His handwriting was careful, and even the handwriting of a man who took his time. He had asked her 3 questions: whether she was in good health, whether she was comfortable with ranch life, and whether she had any concerns about the arrangement he should know about. She had answered yes, yes, and no. 2 of those answers were lies. She was pressing her fingers now against her traveling coat, feeling for the wrap she had wound around her midsection that morning in the hotel room in Billings. Still there. Still holding. She had done it herself. Strips of linen pulled tight knotted 3 times. The doctor in Philadelphia had shown her how before she left. You need rest, he had told her. Real rest. 6 weeks minimum. These won't heal right if you keep moving. I know, she had said. She had boarded the train to Chicago 4 days later. She heard the horse before she saw him. A bay gelding, solid and dark, coming down the street at an easy walk, not in a hurry, not performing. The man on its back sat like someone who'd been raised in a saddle broad through the shoulders, hat pulled low against the morning glare. He stopped in front of the post office, scanned the street once, and found her. Their eyes met. Lillian's first thought was that he did not look angry. That was the thing she had been watching for in men's eyes for 3 years, the particular quality of anger that lived just beneath the surface, waiting for a reason to rise. Thomas had had it from the beginning. She had just convinced herself she was imagining it. This man did not have it. She studied him carefully as he dismounted the way she had learned to study a room for exits. He was tall. He moved without hurry. When he tied his horse to the post and walked toward her, his expression was careful. That was the word. Not cold, not warm yet either. Just careful, like a man approaching something he didn't want to startle. He stopped 3 feet away and took off his hat. Miss Gray. His voice was low and even. She had not expected that either. Yes, she said. Mr. Nash. He nodded once. "I'm glad you made it. The pass road's been rough this week." He glanced at her trunk, then back at her. "Did you eat this morning? I can take you to the diner before we head out if you'd like." Lillian blinked. It was such a simple question. Such an ordinary human question. Thomas had not asked her that kind of question in 2 years of marriage. You did not ask someone if they were hungry when you thought of them as a piece of furniture. "I'm fine," she said. The automatic answer. The safe answer. He studied her for just a moment. Not long, not invasive, just enough to notice. And then nodded again. "All right. We can get moving then. The ride out takes about an hour." He reached for her trunk. She stepped back before she could stop herself. He went still. Neither of them spoke for a second. Then he said quietly, "I'll just put it in the back of the wagon. I left the wagon around the corner." He waited. "Would you like to walk there, or would you rather I bring it to you?" Lillian forced herself to breathe. Slowly. "I can walk." "Good." He lifted the trunk with one arm, like it weighed nothing, and started around the corner without looking back to see if she would follow. She followed. Tag. The wagon was plain, practical, clean, a working man's vehicle. He had set a folded blanket on the seat, which she suspected was for her. He didn't mention it. She sat down and arranged herself with great care, keeping her spine straight, breathing through her nose. He climbed up the other side and gathered the reins. "It's a good time of year to arrive," he said, starting the horses forward. "Summer's heat is gone. Winter hasn't set in. You'll have a few weeks to get your bearings before the weather turns hard." "That sounds good," she said. "The house it's not fancy. I want to be honest about that. I've kept it clean, but it was built for function, not for—" He paused. "I'll make whatever changes you think are necessary. It's your home now, too." Your home now, too. She looked at the road ahead, so he wouldn't see what that phrase did to her face. "I don't need much," she said. "You shouldn't have to need little," he said. "That's different." She turned and looked at him then. He was watching the road, not her. But she felt the words settle somewhere inside her chest, in the bruised, tender place where her ribs were slowly trying to knit themselves back together. You shouldn't have to need little. That's different. She hadn't heard a man make that distinction before. They had been on the road perhaps 15 minutes when the wagon hit a rock in the rut, just a small one, just a quick lurch, and Lillian's hand flew to her side before she could catch herself. She pressed down hard, holding bracing. The pain was a white flash there, and gone, replaced by the slow burning she had lived with for weeks. She was sure he hadn't seen. He had. "Are you hurt?" His voice was even. Not alarmed. Not accusatory. Just asking. "No," she said. "Too fast." "I'm fine. Just the road." He didn't push. He looked back at the road and said nothing for a moment. Then carefully, "There's a smoother route through the ridge. Takes about 10 minutes longer. You want me to go that way?" She almost said no. The word was right there in her mouth, the reflex answer, the small, invisible surrender. Instead, she heard herself say, "Yes, please." He turned the horses without another word. The smoother route wound through a stand of aspens that had gone gold, and the sound of the leaves in the wind filled the silence between them in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. Lillian sat straighter and let herself breathe just slightly deeper than she had since Billings. "Were you in Philadelphia long?" he asked. "Most of my life." "Big change then." "Yes." He was quiet again. Then, "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to tell me, Miss Gray. I want you to know that." She stared at the side of his face. "Most men who say that mean the opposite." He glanced at her, then the first real look he had given her since the street, and something in his expression shifted. Not offense. Not defensiveness. Something closer to recognition, like a man who had learned a hard lesson before and understood exactly what she was saying. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust that statement. I'm just making it." Lillian Gray had no idea what to do with a man who said something like that. She looked away and watched the gold leaves moving. The ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise, and Lillian's first impression was that it was exactly what he had described: functional. 2 barns, a main house, a bunkhouse further back, several outbuildings she couldn't name. A dog came off the porch at a run tail, going circling the wagon wheels in frantic loops. "That's Bear," Xander said. "He's all noise." The dog was enormous. She felt her body tighten. "He won't jump on you," Xander said without looking at her. "He knows better, but I can put him up if you'd prefer." "No," she said. She was tired of flinching. She would not flinch at a dog. "It's fine." Bear circled once more, then sat down and thumped his tail against the dirt as if the effort of greeting was now complete. Xander came around and offered his hand to help her down. She hesitated for one brief second, then took it. His grip was firm, but not squeezing. He released her the moment her feet touched the ground. He led her to the house, held the door, stepped in after her. It was clean. Sparse as promised, but clean: a main room with a long table and chairs, a fireplace, a kitchen corner with iron pots and a good stove, a doorway that led, she assumed, to sleeping quarters, a braided rug on the floor, a window facing west with afternoon light coming through. "Room on the left is yours," he said. "I'm in the one on the right. There's a bolt on your door. I put it on last week." She turned and looked at him. He was standing near the door hat in his hands, watching her the way he'd watched her since that first moment on the street, with that careful, unhurried attention that she still didn't know what to do with. "You put a bolt on my door," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "Before I arrived." "Yes." She could feel something happening in her throat, something inconvenient and frightening. She swallowed it down. "Thank you," she said. "You don't need to thank me for that," he said. "That's just basic." She spent the first hour alone in her room. She unwound the linen wrap from her ribs and examined the bruising in the small mirror above the washstand. Purpling yellow, now fading, which meant healing, which meant time was doing what it was supposed to do. She pressed her fingertips carefully along her side, mapping the damage the way the doctor had shown her assessing. Still there, still real, still hers to carry. She could hear him in the kitchen. Quiet sounds, practical sounds, not angry sounds. She had learned to read the sounds a house made when a man was in it. Thomas's sounds had been jagged. Drawers slammed, boots too heavy. Silence worse than the noise, because silence meant something was building. These sounds were just sounds. A pot set down, water poured, a chair pulled back. She wound herself back up and told herself to stop listening for things that weren't there. He had supper on the table by the time she came out. Simple food: beans and cornbread, and something that might have been elk set out without ceremony. He was already sitting, coffee at his elbow, not waiting on her with any visible impatience. "Hope that's all right," he said. "I'm not a cook. I know it." "It looks good," she said. She sat down carefully. They ate mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, working silence, the kind where two people are simply existing in the same space without needing to fill it with noise. She found herself eating more than she had expected to. The food was plain, but hot, and she realized, somewhere in the middle of it, that she was genuinely hungry for the first time in weeks. When they were done, he collected the plates without asking her to, and set them in the basin. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I've been doing it myself for 2 years, he said. "One more night won't break me." She watched him. "Your wife," she said. It came out carefully. "How long ago?" He didn't tense. 2.5 years. Fever took her. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He dried his hands on a cloth and turned around. "You were married before?" "Yes." "How long were you married?" 3 years. He waited in case she wanted to say more. She didn't. He nodded once, accepting that. "I'll let you get some rest," he said. "The first few days are just about getting comfortable. There's no schedule, no expectations. We can figure out the rest of it as we go." She looked up at him across the kitchen. In the lamplight, his face was easier to read, and what she read was someone who meant what he said without knowing quite how extraordinary that was. "Mr. Nash," she said. "Xander," he said. "Please." "Xander." She paused. "Thank you for today. For the route through the ridge." He tilted his head slightly, something that might have been a question. "You noticed," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, hard not to. She didn't answer that. She said good night and went to her room and slid the bolt. Her bolt, the one he had put there for her before he even knew her face, and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands over her eyes and breathed. One day in Montana, 14 hours. And no one had hurt her. She didn't know yet what to do with that. She woke in the night to the sound of wind off the mountains, and for 3 full seconds she didn't know where she was. Her body braced. Her hand went to her side. Then she heard Bear shift on the porch outside the slow thump of a tail, and she remembered. Montana. The ranch. The man in the other room who had taken the long way around because she pressed her hand to her side. She lay back down. She thought about the bolt. She thought about, you shouldn't have to need little that's different. She thought about how a man could learn to read pain in a woman's breathing and choose not to say anything about it yet, and what that choice meant. Whether it was patience or strategy, whether she would ever be able to tell the difference again. Her ribs ached. They would ache for weeks more. She knew that. But something else ached too. Something older and deeper, and much harder to name, and she wasn't sure if it was fear or something closer to hope. She wasn't sure she was ready to find out which. The next morning she came out of her room before dawn and found coffee already made, a cup set on the table with the handle turned toward where she had sat the night before. He was gone out before first light, she supposed. Ranch work. The world didn't wait. She sat down with the coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup and watched the window slowly fill with gray light. Bear was outside, the glass chin on his paws, looking in at her without demanding anything. She thought, 2 weeks. Give it 2 weeks before you decide anything. Then she thought, but what if 2 weeks is enough to know? She drank the coffee. It was good, strong, and real. Nothing watered down, and outside the window the Montana sky opened up into something vast and cold and clean. And Lillian Gray sat in a stranger's kitchen with 3 cracked ribs and a borrowed name and thought for the first time in longer than she could remember. Maybe this. She didn't let herself finish the thought, but she didn't chase it away either. She had been at the ranch 4 days before she made her first mistake. It wasn't a large mistake. It wasn't even visible to anyone watching from the outside. But Lillian knew the moment it happened, the moment her body betrayed her, and she spent the next 3 hours waiting for the consequences that did not come. It started simply enough. She had gotten up before dawn again, as she had every morning since arriving, finding that the darkness was easier to move through than daylight. Fewer eyes. Less need to perform being fine. She had come into the kitchen, found the coffee already made. He always had it ready before he left. That handle turned toward her side of the table. A small thing she had stopped pretending wasn't deliberate. And she had reached without thinking for the pot on the high shelf where she'd moved it 2 days ago to make room for the flour. She reached too far, too fast, and the pull across her right side lit her up like a brand. The sound she made was not a scream. It was something worse, a sharp, involuntary gasp that she cut off immediately, but not before it had already escaped into the room. Xander was in the doorway. She had not heard him come back in. She hadn't heard the door, hadn't heard his boots. He was just there, hat in his hand, reading her the way she had learned men read situations they wanted to control. Except his face wasn't reading control. It was reading something else entirely. "I've got it," he said, quietly. He crossed the room and lifted the pot down and set it on the counter beside her, and he did not look at her while he did it, which she understood was intentional, giving her somewhere to put her face. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter and said nothing for a long moment. She could feel him thinking. She had learned already that he was a man who thought before he spoke, not because he was slow, but because he was careful, and there was a difference. "I moved the pot," she said. "I should have remembered where I put it." "I'll put a lower shelf in," he said. "This weekend." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to." She picked up her cup and walked to the table and sat down. He stayed at the counter. They drank their coffee in the gray quiet of the early morning, and outside the wind moved through the grass, and Bear thumped his tail twice on the porch, and none of it felt dangerous. That was the thing she kept coming back to over and over in those first days. Nothing here felt dangerous. And that was the most disorienting feeling she had ever experienced, because for 3 years, everything had felt dangerous. She had built her entire nervous system around danger, and now she was walking around in a house where no one raised their voice, and the coffee was always made, and there was a bolt on her door, and she didn't know what to do with her own hands. She wrapped them around the cup and kept her thoughts to herself. That afternoon, a woman named Ruth Calloway arrived. She came in a buckboard, loud and cheerful, with a basket over one arm and an opinion about everything. She was perhaps 60, wide in the shoulders, with gray hair pinned up in a way that suggested she had started pinning it that way 30 years ago and hadn't thought about it since. "You must be her," Ruth said, climbing down from the wagon with the ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "Xander wrote me you were coming. I live on the next spread over. My husband Dale runs cattle, same as Xander, only Dale's considerably less organized about it." She thrust the basket forward. "I brought pie and a pound of butter and some opinions about curtains. You can take the first 2 and ignore the third." Lillian felt something loosen in her chest slightly, the unexpected relief of a woman who talked too much. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Lillian. I know who you are. Come on inside, I'll put the kettle on." It was Ruth's kitchen too, apparently. Lillian followed her in and watched her move through the space like water finding things, starting the kettle, setting the pie on the table. "He behaving himself?" Ruth asked without looking up. "Mr. Nash?" "Unless you've got another he. Yes, he's been very considerate." Ruth glanced at her, then a quick, sharp look that saw more than Lillian was offering. "Good," she said. And then, surprisingly, she left it there. They sat at the table with tea and pie, and Ruth talked about the valley and the winter coming, and Dale's bad knee, and the new minister in town, who was 22 years old, and terrified of his own congregation, and Lillian listened and ate pie blackberry good pie, and felt for a few strange minutes almost ordinary. Then Ruth said casually, cutting herself a second slice, "You're favoring your right side." Lillian's fork stopped moving. "I'm not. Every time you shift in the chair, you brace it," Ruth said. She wasn't looking at Lillian. She was looking at the pie. "I'm not asking about it. I'm just telling you I see it, because I think you're used to pretending it isn't there, and I don't want you to use up all that energy on my account." A silence fell between them. Lillian set her fork down. "I had an accident before I came here," she said, the word she had rehearsed. "Accident." Ruth nodded slowly. One syllable? No follow-up? No pressing. "The pie is very good," Lillian said. "It's Dale's grandmother's recipe. She was a difficult woman, but she could bake." Ruth poured more tea into both their cups. "You tell Xander if you need anything, and if you can't tell Xander, you tell me." Lillian looked at her. "I'm serious," Ruth said. "That's not a politeness. That's an offer." Lillian picked up her fork again. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway." "Ruth, I don't answer to anything else." "Dator." Xander came in from the east field as Ruth was leaving, and the two of them spoke briefly by her buckboard while Lillian stood in the doorway. She couldn't hear what they said. She watched their faces instead, Ruth's direct and telling him something. Xander's listening without visible reaction. When Ruth climbed up and drove away, he stood for a moment looking after her, then turned and walked back toward the house. His expression when he came in was neutral, carefully neutral. "She likes you," he said. "She's formidable," Lillian said. "She is." He went to wash his hands at the basin. Did she behave herself? She brought blackberry pie. That's her version of behaving herself. Lillian almost smiled. She caught it in time and turned toward the stove instead, but she felt him register it just barely, the way he registered everything, filing it somewhere without comment. Damn. The week moved. The way ranch weeks moved, structured by work and weather, with no room for self-consciousness. Lillian found her place in it, slowly, cautiously testing each step before she put her weight on it. She cooked breakfast. She kept the kitchen. She walked out to the garden that had gone to autumn, but still held some root vegetables worth saving. And she spent an afternoon there with her hands in the cold earth, pulling things up, making herself useful in the only quiet way available. Her ribs were getting better. Marginally. She knew the stages well enough by now, the sharp white pain of the first 2 weeks, giving way to the grinding ache of healing, which was less dramatic, but harder in some ways because it had no edges. Just there, always a constant reminder of what she was carrying. She carried it quietly. She had practice. What she hadn't practiced was being watched with concern rather than suspicion. Xander did it without seeming to a glance when she sat down. A slight pause when she reached for something the way he would appear at the useful moment to carry something heavy before she had decided whether to ask. He never said anything about it directly. He never made her feel managed or observed. He just noticed. And then he did something about what he noticed without making it a production. It was one of the most intimate things anyone had ever done for her, and she hated that she thought of it that way because she had very strict ideas about what she was and wasn't ready for. On Thursday, she found that he had installed a lower shelf in the kitchen while she slept. She stood looking at it for a long time before she picked up the coffee pot and set it there. The first real conversation happened on Friday evening. She had come out of her room around 9 o'clock, couldn't sleep the ache restless that night, and found him at the main table with a spread of papers that turned out to be land maps, a lamp-pulled close pencil behind his ear. He looked up when she came in. Couldn't sleep. No. She crossed to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. I won't bother you. You're not bothering me. She stood at the counter and drank the water and watched him look back at his maps. His hands were large and weathered, and he held the pencil with particular care, like someone who had learned precision late and valued it because of that. What are you working on? She asked. He looked up again, and this time there was something different in his expression. A slight opening, the look of a man who didn't usually get asked. East boundary line, he said. There's a dispute with the land office about 22 acres. They've got a survey from 4 years ago that I think is wrong, and I'm trying to build the case for a new one. She moved closer. She looked at the maps without touching them. How long has the dispute been going on? 8 months. Who at the land office? He glanced at her. A man named Pritchard. Cornelius Pritchard. He's the deputy registrar. Something moved in her expression. Not quite recognition, but the particular alertness of someone who had dealt with bureaucratic dishonesty before and knew its shapes. Has he offered to resolve it for a consideration? Xander was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. Twice. And you said no. I said no. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, forgetting for just a moment to sit carefully. She flinched. He saw it. Neither of them said anything about it. Can I look? She said, nodding at the maps. He turned them toward her without hesitation. She studied them. She had grown up the daughter of a Philadelphia land attorney, not rich, not prominent, but rigorous. She had sat in her father's office from the age of 8 and listened to men argue about surveys and boundary lines and deed descriptions, and some of it had settled into her permanently the way childhood knowledge does. This creek line here, she said, pointing, is it seasonal or year-round? He leaned forward. Year-round. Why? Because if it's year-round, it qualifies as a natural landmark under the 1862 Homestead provision, which means the survey has to reference it. If Pritchard's survey doesn't reference it, the survey is technically invalid on its face. The room was very quiet. Xander sat back slowly and looked at her. How do you know that? He said. My father was an attorney. She straightened the map, a small, self-conscious gesture. Land law specifically. I spent a lot of years in his office. Lillian. He said her first name for the first time. That's the argument I need. You'd need to document the creek, she said. Sworn statements from witnesses who can confirm it runs year-round. At least 3. And you'd need a copy of the 1862 provision to submit alongside the complaint. I can get the witnesses, he said. He was leaning forward now, the land dispute suddenly alive in a new way. Dale Calloway and at least 2 ranch hands who've been here longer than the survey. The provision I wouldn't know where to get a copy. The county courthouse should have it. Federal records are usually held in Billings. He was looking at her with an expression that made her chest hurt for an entirely different reason than broken ribs. It was the expression of a man encountering someone he had underestimated without meaning to, and being genuinely glad to be wrong. I thought you said you'd been working in a dress shop, he said. I did, she said. Before that I worked for my father, before he died. When did he die? 6 years ago? She paused. I married Thomas the following year. She hadn't meant to say that. Thomas's name offered up without armor, just sitting there in the lamplight between them. Xander didn't pounce on it. He didn't ask who Thomas was or what had happened, or anything at all. He just let the name exist and moved gently around it. I'm sorry about your father, he said. She nodded. Her throat was doing something she didn't want it to do. The creek argument is good, she said. It's the kind of thing Pritchard would hope you'd never figure out. He would, Xander said. He's been hoping that for 8 months. He began gathering the maps into a careful stack, and she watched his hands, and outside, the wind moved across the Montana dark, and the lamp threw its amber light across everything, and neither of them filled the silence with unnecessary words. After a while she said, I should try to sleep. Me too, he said. Thank you for this. I mean that. She stood carefully, and he did not pretend not to notice her care, but he also didn't reach for her, didn't hover, just watched with that quiet, steady attention that she was still learning to read. Good night, Xander. Good night, Lillian. She went to her room and slid the bolt and sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Her ribs ached. Her heart was doing something complicated and frightening. She thought I told him my father's name. I told him about Thomas. Not much, just the edges. But the edges were more than she had told anyone in 2 years. She pressed her hand flat against her side and breathed. Saturday brought a hard cold front, and Xander spent most of it in the barn. She could hear the sounds of the ranch through the walls, the horses, the distant shout of a ranch hand, something being repaired with methodical hammer strikes. She made bread. It was something her hands knew how to do without her brain getting involved, which was what she needed. Ruth appeared at noon with Dale, a big, slow-moving man with a face like weathered kindness, and they all ate together at the long table. Dale told a story about a horse that had gone missing for a week and turned up in a neighbor's vegetable garden. Ruth corrected every third detail. Xander ate with the ease of a man comfortable in his own house and laughed twice, a real laugh. Quiet, but genuine. And Lillian sat at the corner of the table and felt herself existing inside something that resembled a life. After they left, she was washing dishes at the basin when Xander came in from checking on something in the yard. He stopped behind her, not close, several feet back. Can I ask you something? He said. Her hands slowed in the water. Yes. I've been trying not to, he said. But I think you'd rather be asked straight than have someone tiptoeing around something. She turned from the basin and looked at him. What is it? He was holding his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim. A nervous gesture she realized, the first she'd seen from him. Are you in pain? He said. Right now? Today? She opened her mouth to say no. The no was right there. She had said it so many times it was almost meaningless, just a sound her body made when the question came. But he was looking at her, not demanding, not pressuring, just looking, and she remembered what she had thought in the night. The edges are more than I've given anyone in 2 years. Yes, she said. Some. The word came out small and strange, like something she had kept in a box so long it had forgotten how to be in the open air. He nodded once. Nothing dramatic. No pity flooding his face, no alarm, no flood of questions. Just acknowledgement. All right, he said. Is there anything that makes it worse that I should know about so I can avoid it? She thought of the high shelf, the rough road, the way reaching too fast lit her up from the inside. Reaching overhead, she said, and uneven ground. Okay. He nodded again. I'll keep that in mind. He turned toward the door. She heard herself say his name. Xander. He stopped. Looked back. That's the first time I've told anyone that, she said. That I'm in pain, except the doctor. He stood very still for a moment. I'm glad you told me, he said, quietly, without making it more than it was. Thank you. He went back outside. She turned back to the basin and pressed both wet hands flat against the edge and stood there breathing. The ache in her side was the same as it had always been. Nothing had changed physically, but something had. She couldn't name it yet. She wasn't ready to name it yet. But it was there, small and fragile and terrifying, like a green shoot coming up through frost, and she did not stomp it out the way she would have a week ago, because some part of her, some exhausted, battered, still surviving part of her, decided in that moment to let it be. Just for now. Just for today. She finished the dishes and dried her hands and went to sit by the window and watch the last of the afternoon light move across the grass. Bear was out there chasing nothing, tail going. She watched him and breathed and did not chase the feeling away. The lower shelf changed things. Not in any way Lillian could have explained to someone who hadn't lived the way she had lived. It wasn't the shelf itself. It was the fact that he had done it without being asked, without making a moment of it, without standing in the kitchen waiting for her to notice and thank him. She had simply found it there one morning, the coffee pot already sitting on it, and understood that this was how he communicated the things he couldn't say directly. She started communicating back the same way. She began leaving his coffee cup on the right side of the table instead of the left, because she had noticed on the third day that he was right-handed, and the left placement meant an extra reach across his body first thing in the morning. She began keeping the lamp trimmed on his side of the table when he worked late on his land papers. She began making a second piece of cornbread without being asked because she had watched him eat the first one and want more, and decide not to take it. Small things. Invisible architecture. The language of two people learning to share space without hurting each other. She was aware that she was doing it. She was also aware that it frightened her because the last time she had paid this much attention to a man's habits and preferences, it had been in service of survival. Memorizing Thomas's moods, the way a sailor memorizes weather, reading the signs of a storm hours before it arrived. This felt different. This felt like choice. Like she was choosing to notice because noticing was something she wanted to do, not something she had to do to stay safe. She wasn't sure the difference was real yet. She held it at arm's length and kept moving. 2 weeks in the weather turned hard and fast, the way Montana weather does when it decides it is done being reasonable. She woke one morning to find ice on the inside of the window glass, and her breath visible in the room, and she pulled on every layer she had, and came out to find Xander already back from the barn, stomping cold off his boots at the door, his face raw from the wind. Temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight, he said. First hard freeze of the year. We'll need to check the root cellar this morning. Make sure the stores are sealed before it drops further. I can do that, she said. He looked at her, that particular look, the one that was measuring something she didn't always know she was showing. The cellar stairs are steep, he said carefully. The ground's uneven down there. She remembered telling him, reaching overhead, and uneven ground. She had said it once 2 weeks ago, standing at the kitchen basin with wet hands, and he had filed it away like something worth keeping. I can do it, she said again. I know my limits. A pause. Then he nodded. I'll open the cellar door for you. The latch sticks. He didn't offer to come with her. He didn't reassign the task. He just removed the one obstacle that was genuinely beyond comfort and let her do the rest. She was beginning to understand that this was his particular form of respect, not wrapping her in cotton, not pretending she was made of glass. Just standing close enough to catch her if she fell far enough back to let her walk on her own. She went down into the cellar and checked the stores, moving carefully, one hand on the wall when the ground tilted, and she got it done and came back up and told him which barrels needed resealing, and he did them that afternoon. That evening she caught herself thinking, Thomas never let me do anything alone. He said it was because he cared. She stood very still with that thought until it settled into the shape it had always been. Not care. Control disguised as care. The most dangerous kind, because it looked like love until it had you completely. She pushed the thought down and went to make supper. The first time she heard the name Thomas Gray spoken by someone other than herself, it came from a stranger on horseback who had no idea what he was about to do. He arrived on a Tuesday, a man named Holt, wide-faced, and traveling through claiming to be a cattle buyer passing east. He stopped at the ranch for water and some conversation, and Xander brought him in for coffee, the way hospitality demanded, and they sat at the table and talked about cattle prices and the early freeze and the state of the northern trails. Lillian brought cups to the table and turned to go back to the kitchen. "Excuse me, ma'am," Holt said, and she turned. He was looking at her with the mild, incurious look of a man making conversation. "You from back east, I can hear it in your voice." "Philadelphia," she said. "Huh." He nodded. "I worked Philadelphia some years back. Knew a man in the leather trade there. Gray was his name, Thomas Gray. You wouldn't know him." The floor didn't move, but something in Lillian's body understood it should have. She felt Xander's attention shift, not visibly, not dramatically, just a slight change in the quality of his stillness, like a man who has heard something and is choosing very deliberately how to receive it. "No," Lillian said. Her voice was perfectly level, the survival mechanism fully operational. "I don't know him." "Doesn't matter," Holt said cheerfully. "He passed away, must be 8-9 months ago now. Strange business. Fell down his own stairs way I heard it." He shook his head with the particular pleasure of a man who enjoys a story. "Left behind a wife, never found out what happened to her. Some in Philadelphia said she'd run off some, said, 'More coffee,'" Lillian said. She said it directly, cleanly cutting across his sentence with the kind of precision that didn't invite argument. Holt blinked and looked at his cup and said, "Sure, thank you," and she refilled it and went back to the kitchen and set the pot down very carefully on the lower shelf and stood with both hands flat on the counter and looked at the wall. Her heart was going too fast. She could feel it in her throat, in the tips of her fingers, in the space between her ribs where the bones were still learning how to hold themselves together. He died 8 or 9 months ago. Holt had said it with no weight, no significance. Just a fact on the road. She had been gone for 6 weeks. 6 weeks since she had gotten on the train in Philadelphia with 1 trunk and 3 cracked ribs and a lie ready on her lips for anyone who asked. Holt left 20 minutes later. She heard the hoofbeats fade down the road. She heard the chair push back from the table. She heard boots cross the floor. He didn't come into the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. "Lillian," he said. "I know what you're going to ask," she said without turning around. "I'm not going to ask anything," he said. "I just want you to know that I'm here if you want to talk." She turned then. He was in the doorway, just standing there, neither advancing nor retreating, giving her the full space of the kitchen and her own choice about what happened next. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at his face, this man she had known for 2 weeks. This man who built lower shelves and took the long road and had never once made her feel like a thing he owned. "Thomas Gray was my husband," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "He's dead." "I heard." "I didn't push him," she said. The words came out harder than she intended, with the force of something that had been locked up too long. "I want you to know that. I didn't push him." Xander's expression didn't change in the way she had been bracing for. No suspicion flared. No careful recalibration of how he looked at her. He just said steadily, "I know you didn't." "You can't know that," she said. "You didn't know me then." "No," he agreed. "But I know you now. And I know this innocent people don't generally announce that they're innocent unprompted. They announce it because someone accused them." He paused. "Were you accused?" The kitchen was very quiet. "His family," she said. "After he died. They said they implied—" She stopped. Started again. "I left before they could make it official. I had nothing. No money of my own, no family left, no one in Philadelphia who would take my side against the Gray family." Her voice was almost steady. Almost. "So I wrote to the agency. And I came here." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Are they looking for you?" It was the practical question. The right question. She felt something in her chest recognize it. The relief of being asked something real instead of something performative. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't think so. I don't think they cared enough about me to look. I think they cared about the story about having someone to blame. And once I was gone, they could blame me from a distance without having to deal with me in front of them." He nodded slowly, processing that. "Then you're safe here," he said. "You don't know that either." "No," he said, "but I'm telling you anyway, because I want you to feel it even if you can't believe it yet." She pressed her lips together hard. Her eyes were doing something she was not going to let them do. "Why?" she said. "Why does it matter to you? You don't know me. This is a contract. This is a business arrangement. You advertised for a wife who could work the ranch, and I showed up half-broken and full of secrets, and you have every right to—" "Lillian." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her completely. "Stop." She stopped. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and I need you to just let it land before you argue with it." He waited. "You are not a business arrangement. You haven't been one since the first morning I found you sitting in my kitchen with both hands around a coffee cup like it was the only solid thing in the world. I don't know everything about what you've been through, but I know enough to know that it cost you something that doesn't grow back easily, and I am not going to add to that cost. Not for anything." She looked at him. Her throat had closed. "You put a bolt on my door before you'd ever seen my face," she said. The words came out rough and unsteady. "Yes," he said. "Why?" "Because I figured whoever was coming deserved to feel safe in her own room." He paused. "Because I thought if I were a woman traveling alone to marry a stranger, that would be the thing I'd want most. Just to know that the door could close and stay closed." She put a hand over her mouth. Not fast enough. He crossed the kitchen, then not rushing, still careful, still giving her the choice to step back if she needed to. He stopped close enough that she could see the weather lines in his face and the steadiness in his eyes. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said. "Not ever if you don't want to. But I need you to know that whatever you tell me, I am not going to use it against you, and I am not going to change how I look at you." "You don't know what there is to tell yet," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." She didn't tell him that night. She wasn't ready that night. But something broke loose inside her. Not dramatically, not all at once, more like the first crack in river ice in early spring, the sound of something giving way beneath the surface. She went to her room, and she sat on the floor with her back against the bed, because somehow the floor felt more real, and she pressed her hands over her ribs and she cried. Quietly controlled the way she had learned to cry in a house where crying had consequences. But real crying. The kind that means something has moved. She cried for her father. She cried for the 3 years she had spent in Thomas's house, convincing herself that the walls closing in were normal. She cried for the stairs, the moment at the top of the stairs that had ended everything, and for the fact that she could not tell anyone the full truth of that moment yet, because the truth was complicated in ways that had no simple shape. She cried until it was done, and then she washed her face in the basin, and looked at herself in the small mirror and said out loud quietly to her own reflection, "You are still here." She had said it before, many times in many mirrors, in many rooms where she was not safe. This was the first time she said it in a room with a bolt on the door that she had put there herself, in a house where no one had raised their voice in the 16 days she had been present in a valley in Montana, where the sky was very big and the coffee was always made, and a man who barely knew her had told her that whatever she told him, he would not use it against her. "You are still here," she said again, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like more than just survival. The next morning she came out, and he was at the table with his land papers, same as any morning. He looked up. Their eyes met. Neither of them mentioned the conversation from the night before. It sat between them not as an unresolved thing, but as a settled one, something that had happened and could now be part of the landscape instead of an obstacle in the road. She poured coffee. She put his cup on the right side. He made room for her at the table without being asked. She sat down and looked at the maps. "Did you send to Billings for the 1862 provision yet?" He shook his head. "Wrote the letter. Haven't sent it." "Send it today," she said. "Pritchard will move faster than you expect if he thinks you're building a case. Men like that always do." He looked at her. "Men like that. Men who depend on other people not knowing what they know," she said. "They're always more afraid than they look." Xander held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up the letter and set it on top of the stack for town. "I'll send it today." She nodded and looked at the maps and felt very carefully the tentative shape of something she had not felt in years' partnership. Not the hollow word Thomas had used for it, which had meant compliance dressed in softer language. Real partnership, two people at a table each bringing what they had, building something neither of them could build alone. She was aware it was fragile. She was aware she could be wrong. She had been wrong before, in ways that had cost her everything. But she spread her hands flat on the map and looked at the creek line that Pritchard had deliberately excluded from his survey, and she thought about the 1862 provision and what it meant and what it could do, and for a few minutes she was just someone who knew something useful sitting across from someone who needed to know it. For a few minutes, she was not broken at all. That afternoon, Ruth came again alone this time without Dale. She came in quickly with less of her usual bluster, and Lillian felt the change in the atmosphere before Ruth had even taken off her coat. "There's something you should know," Ruth said, settling at the table. "I heard it this morning from Edna Marsh at the post office, and Edna hears everything worth hearing." Lillian went still. "What is it?" "Cornelius Pritchard was in town this morning. He's been talking." Ruth's mouth pressed flat. "Asking questions about Xander's new wife, where she came from, whether there's any record of her background." The kitchen went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. "What kind of questions?" Lillian asked. "The kind a man asks when he wants to find something he can use," Ruth said bluntly. "Now, I don't know what he thinks he's going to find. But I know Pritchard, and I know he's the type who goes after a man's flank when he can't take him head on, and Xander's flanks." She looked at Lillian steadily. "Right now, you're his flank." Lillian set both hands flat on the table. The room was very quiet. "He knows Xander is building a case against the survey," she said. "Must do. And he's trying to find something to discredit the challenge before it reaches the land office." Ruth nodded slowly. "That's how I read it." Lillian breathed, in and out, carefully, the way she had learned to breathe when everything inside her wanted to run. She thought about Philadelphia, about the Gray family, about the word that Holt had used so casually, strange business, and the way rumors traveled between cities faster than trains sometimes. She thought about what it would mean if Pritchard found something. If he went looking in Philadelphia records and found a widow who had left under a cloud, who had been whispered about in the right circles, who had arrived in Montana with no money and no references, and a body full of healing damage. She thought about what it would do to Xander, to his case, to everything he had been building for 8 months. And she thought about what she was going to have to do now, because she could see it already, the shape of it, the necessity of it. She was going to have to tell him the full truth before Pritchard found a distorted version of it and told it for her. She looked at Ruth. Ruth looked back at her, reading her face with the precision of a woman who had been reading faces for 60 years. "Tonight," Lillian said quietly. "I'll talk to him tonight." Ruth reached across the table and put her hand over Lillian's for one brief, firm moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She gathered her coat and left, and Lillian sat at the table in the cold kitchen and listened to the wind off the mountains, and thought about the truth she had been carrying for 6 weeks, and what it was going to feel like to finally set it down. She thought it was probably going to feel like being broken open. She thought it was probably the only thing left to do. She spent the afternoon preparing what she would say. Not rehearsing, she had learned that rehearsed confessions always fell apart in the wrong places, that the mind would grip the memorized words and lose the actual truth underneath them. She was preparing in the other sense, clearing away the things she had been carrying on top of the real story, so that when she finally reached it, she could hand it over whole. She washed the supper dishes before he came in. She swept the floor. She trimmed the lamp and set it on the table between the 2 chairs rather than over his land papers, which was a signal she hoped he would read, and understood he probably would, because he read her signals the way she read his, quietly, carefully, without making a performance of it. When he came through the door, he stopped just inside, reading the room the way he always did. He looked at the lamp. He looked at her face. He set his hat on the peg by the door and came and sat down in the chair across from hers, and he did not reach for his papers. "Ruth came today," Lillian said. "I know. I saw her buckboard leaving when I came up from the south field." He waited. "What did she say?" "Pritchard is asking questions about me in town. Who I am, where I came from, what's in my background." Something moved behind Xander's eyes. Not fear, not exactly, but the recognition of a man who understands immediately what the board has just done. He leaned forward and put his forearms on the table and looked at her steadily. "He's going after the survey challenge," he said. "Yes, and he thinks I'm the softest point." She said it plainly the way Ruth had said it. No softening. "He's right that I'm the softest point. He's wrong about what he'll find, but he could find enough to make it complicated." Xander was quiet for a moment. "Complicated how?" She folded her hands on the table, looked at them, looked up. "I'm going to tell you everything," she said. "Not because I've decided you've earned it, or that I trust you completely. I want to be honest about that. I'm telling you because if Pritchard finds a version of this story first, it will be the wrong version, and the wrong version will be used against you, and that—" Her voice didn't waver, but it tightened. "That I will not allow. You've given me something real here. I won't be the reason it gets taken from you." He didn't speak. He just looked at her with that steady, unhurried attention and waited. She took a breath. "Thomas Gray was not a good man," she said. "He was a charming man, which is different. I didn't understand the difference when I married him. I was 24, and my father had just died, and Thomas was certain and capable, and he wanted me specifically, or so I thought. I understand now that what he wanted was someone without resources, someone who would have no place to go if things went wrong." She paused. "He chose correctly." Xander's jaw tightened slightly. Not at her, she could read the direction of it. At Thomas. "The first year was not terrible, not good. He was controlling in ways I kept telling myself were normal. He managed the money. He managed my social contacts. He told me which women were appropriate to be friends with and which were not. He said it was because he knew Philadelphia society, and I didn't, and I believed him because I wanted to." She heard herself say the words and felt how true they still were, still sharp after all this time. The second year it got worse. He started the things he said, in private, in public sometimes, in front of people in ways that looked like jokes. The kind of thing where if you reacted, you were the one being oversensitive. She stopped. Her hands on the table were very still. "The third year," she said, "he started hitting me." The room was completely silent. Xander did not move. She watched him receive it, watched something move across his face that was controlled grief, not performance, the kind a man shows when he is genuinely hit by something and is choosing not to make it about himself. Not at first often, she said. And always with a reason. Always something I had done, some failure he could point to. I burned the roast. I spoke to a man at a dinner party for too long. I spent $2 on fabric without asking. She paused. The reasons got smaller as time went on. Eventually, there didn't need to be a reason at all. Lillian, let me finish, she said, not harshly. If I stop, I won't start again. He closed his mouth and nodded once. Last January, she said. He came home from his club in a particular kind of mood. I had learned to read his moods the way you read the weather here. You watch for signs hours before the storm arrives. She took a careful breath. He came upstairs. I was in the bedroom. He started it escalated faster than usual. I tried to go around him to the door, and he grabbed my arm and I pulled away and he... She stopped. He pushed me. She felt it again in her body. The weightlessness of the top of the stairs. The horrifying millisecond of nothing beneath her feet, the sound she made that she had never heard herself make before. I went down the stairs, she said. All of them. I hit the floor at the bottom, and I couldn't move for I don't know how long. Minutes, maybe. Thomas came down and looked at me. Her voice was absolutely even. She had learned to tell this part without expression, because expression made it impossible to finish. He looked at me for a long time. Then he stepped over me and walked out the front door. Xander made a sound, low and involuntary and quickly contained. I got myself up, she said. I don't know how. I got to the sofa and I lay there all night. In the morning, a neighbor woman came, Mrs. Adler. She had seen something through the window and she got the doctor. 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising. He told me to rest for 6 weeks. She looked at Xander directly. Thomas died 4 days later, she said. The doctor came to tell me. Thomas had collapsed at his club, his heart. He was 41 years old, and he had a defective heart, and no one had known it, including him. She let that sit for a moment. He died before he could do anything more. Before he could tell anyone what had happened on the stairs. Before he could construct whatever story he was planning. Xander leaned forward. His family, he said. They knew about the stairs. Not the truth of it, but they saw me. They saw the state I was in at the funeral, and they had their own version already built. Thomas's brother Gerald is a prominent man. He decided within a week that whatever had happened between Thomas and me, I was responsible for Thomas's death. Her mouth set hard. He had no evidence, but he had a name and money and connections, and I had none of those things. And I knew what happened to women who tried to fight men like Gerald Gray in Philadelphia in 1878. So you left. So I left. She breathed out slowly. I took what I had, $40 and some clothes and my father's old law books, which I sold in Chicago for the train fare west. I wrote to the agency. I answered your letter. She paused. I told you I was in good health. You lied, he said. But there was nothing accusatory in it, just acknowledgement. I lied, she agreed, because I needed to get out, and I was afraid that if I told the truth, no one would take me. She looked at him directly. I'm not going to apologize for it. I did what I had to do to survive. But I'm telling you now, all of it, because you deserve the truth, and because Pritchard cannot be the one to give it to you. The lamp between them burned steady. Outside, the wind had picked up off the mountains. Xander sat back. He ran one hand over his face slowly, a man absorbing something large, and then he put both hands flat on the table and looked at her. How long? He said. She frowned slightly. How long what? How long were you carrying all of that alone? Before tonight. The question hit her somewhere she had not armored. She had prepared for anger. She had prepared for disbelief, for suspicion, for the careful, legal parsing of a man assessing his own risk. She had not prepared for that question quiet and direct, and aimed precisely at the part of her that had been most alone. She felt the tears before she could stop them. Not the quiet, controlled crying of the night before alone on her bedroom floor. This was different. This came from somewhere deeper, from the place she had sealed off and armored, and refused to look at the place that had been waiting for someone to ask the right question. She pressed her hand over her mouth. He was out of his chair before she had taken her next breath. Not rushing, not overcrowding her, just moving to her side of the table and pulling a chair close and sitting beside her. Not touching her, just close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. 3 years, she managed around the hand pressed over her mouth. I was carrying it for 3 years. Lillian. I'm sorry. She shook her head. I told myself I wasn't going to... Stop apologizing, he said quietly. You've been holding that for 3 years. If you need 5 minutes to stop holding it, you take 5 minutes. She put both hands over her face, and she let it come. Not everything she didn't have, everything in her yet, didn't have the full capacity, but enough. She cried for the stairs, and for the $40, and for the train ride through Illinois in January, with 3 broken ribs and nowhere to go. She cried for her father's law books sold to a stranger in Chicago. She cried for every morning she had woken up in Thomas's house and talked herself into staying one more day because she had nowhere else to be. She cried until it was done. When she lowered her hands, Xander was still there. Still close. Not watching her with pity or discomfort, just steady the way he was steady at everything, the way she had come to depend on that steadiness without meaning to. Nothing that happened to you is your fault, he said. Simple. Declarative. No qualification. She looked at him. Her eyes were burning. You don't know every detail yet. Doesn't matter, he said. He put his hands on you. He pushed you downstairs and stepped over you on the floor and walked out the door. Nothing before or after that changes what that is. She shook her head, not disagreeing, just overwhelmed by the absence of conditions. She had spent 3 years in a world of conditions. If you if you hadn't. If only you were different. The absence of them was almost too much to stand. His family is going to be a problem, she said, because she needed to move toward something practical, or she was going to fall apart entirely. If Pritchard contacts anyone in Philadelphia, if he writes to Gerald Gray, then we deal with it, Xander said. It's not that simple. I know it's not simple. His voice was level and certain. I didn't say simple. I said we deal with it. He looked at her. You know land law. I know this county and the people in it, and I have 8 months of Pritchard's behavior documented. Whatever Gerald Gray tries to build from Philadelphia, we have the ground right here. She stared at him. You're not going to ask me to leave. Something moved across his face, something that was almost anger, but she understood now that it was never directed at her, this particular expression. It was the expression he wore when the world was being less than what it should be. No, he said. I am not going to ask you to leave. He paused. I want to say something, and I need you to hear it. Really hear it. He waited until she nodded. You came here with broken ribs and a secret that could have gone 10 different ways, and you sat at this table and helped me see what Pritchard was doing with that survey, and you have been the steadiest person in this house for 3 weeks, Lillian. Whatever you came here carrying, you have not been a burden. You have been... He stopped. His jaw worked once. You have been exactly who I needed here. And I am not going to forget that because of what Gerald Gray thinks about you from 1,000 miles away. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the lower shelf, the long route through the aspens, the bolt on the door he'd put there before he knew her name. You meant all of it, she said. Not a question. Every bit, he said. She pressed her lips together and looked away because if she kept looking at him, she was going to cry again, and she was genuinely finished with crying for one evening. Pritchard moves fast, she said. If he writes to Philadelphia, we'll know within 2 to 3 weeks. By then, we'll have the response from Billings on the 1862 provision. We need more than the provision. We need the sworn statements from the witnesses about the creek, Dale Calloway, and the ranch hands. I can have those by end of the week. And we need to get them to the land office before Pritchard does anything official. If we move first, we put him on defense, Xander finished. He was leaning forward now, the problem sharpening his focus the way problems did for certain kinds of men, the kind who got clearer under pressure instead of louder. If our challenge is already filed and documented before he surfaces anything about you, he looks like a man grasping at distractions. Exactly. She straightened in her chair. How soon can you get to Billings? 3 days if I push. 2 if Dale lends me his fast horse. Ask Dale tomorrow morning. He almost smiled. It came and went quickly, but she caught it, the particular quality of it, not amused, but something warmer, something that had to do with her specifically. She felt it land somewhere and did her best not to examine where. You're remarkable, he said quietly. I want you to know that. She shook her head. I'm not, she said. I'm tired of losing. I've been losing for 3 years and I'm done with it. That's what remarkable looks like, he said, from where I'm sitting. She didn't sleep for a long time that night. She lay on her bed and looked at the dark ceiling and turned the evening over and over, what she had said, what he had said, the quality of the silence between the words. She thought about his face when she had told him about the stairs, the controlled grief, the anger that was never at her. Nothing that happened to you is your fault. She had heard that before. The doctor in Philadelphia had said something similar in the careful clinical language of a man trying to be kind. Mrs. Adler had said something like it, pressing her hand. Ruth had implied it the first afternoon with 2 words and a look. But from Xander it had landed differently. It had landed like something true rather than something meant to comfort her. And the difference between those 2 things was the difference between a candle and a fire. She pressed her hand to her side. The ribs were healing. She could feel it in the quality of the ache, which was dulling at the edges, the sharpness retreating. Dr. Haynes in Philadelphia had told her 6 weeks for structural healing. She was at 5 weeks now. 1 more week, and her body would be something close to whole again. The rest of it, the other damage, the older damage, the kind that didn't show up on any examination, she didn't know the timeline for that. She suspected there wasn't a timeline. She suspected it was the kind of thing you carried forward and learned to live with, and occasionally, in the right conditions, with the right person, found ways to set down piece by piece. Like tonight, 1 large heavy piece set down. She thought about Pritchard, about Gerald Gray, about the long arm of Philadelphia and what it could reach. She thought about what Xander had said, whatever he tries to build from Philadelphia, we have the ground right here. We. She turned onto her side and breathed carefully through the last of the ache. Outside, Bear shifted on the porch. The wind moved through the grass. She thought about the creek line on the map and the 1862 provision and what it would mean when the land office received their challenge. She thought about the witnesses Xander would gather and the letter already on its way to Billings and the case they were building together at the kitchen table under the amber lamplight. Then she heard a sound that stopped her thoughts completely. Hoofbeats. Late, coming fast from the road toward the ranch. She sat up. The hoofbeats slowed and stopped. She heard Xander's door open. He had heard it too, and his boots crossed the main room and the front door open. She was up and at her own door listening. A man's voice outside, urgent. She couldn't make out the words. Then Xander's voice, lower, controlled, when? A pause. Then, get inside. Get warm. The front door opened again, and she heard 2 pairs of boots, and then Xander's voice through her door, quiet and direct. Lillian, you need to hear this. She opened her door. The man standing in the main room was young, one of the ranch hands, barely 20, face red from cold riding. His name was Pete, and he'd been at the ranch since spring, and he was looking at her with an expression that made her stomach drop. Pete rode from town, Xander said. He was watching her carefully. Pritchard was at the telegraph office tonight, late. After closing, the operator noticed because the light was on when it shouldn't have been. Who did he telegraph? She said. Xander looked at her steadily. Philadelphia, Pete said. The operator didn't get the full address, but he got the name. He looked at his boots for a moment, then back up at her. Gerald Gray, he said. The name hit the room like a stone hitting water, the immediate impact, and then the ripples spreading out in every direction, touching everything. Lillian stood very still. Xander was watching her face. She could feel him watching it, not with alarm, not with the calculation of a man reassessing his position, but with the steady attention of someone who had already made his decision and was simply present for whatever came next. "How long for a reply?" she said. "Telegraph day. Maybe 2 if Gray responds fast." Xander paused. "Do you think he will?" She thought about Gerald Gray, the cold precision of his grief, the way he had looked at her at the funeral with no emotion she could name, just the flat assessment of a problem to be managed. "He'll respond tonight," she said, "if he's awake when it arrives. And Gerald Gray doesn't sleep much." She breathed. "He's been waiting for something like this, a thread to pull. He just needed someone to hand him one." Xander sent Pete to the bunkhouse with food and told him to sleep. When they were alone again, he turned to her. "Then we move in the morning," he said. "First light, I ride to Dale's and get the statements. You start writing the formal challenge, everything you know about the creek provision, all of it in the language that will hold up." She looked at him. "That could take all night." "Then it takes all night." She stared at him for one long moment. Then she crossed to the table and pulled out the chair and sat down and reached for his land papers. "Get me more paper," she said. He went to the shelf and brought back a full stack and set it at her elbow. He put the coffee on, and they went to work. The lamp burned between them through the dark Montana hours, and outside Pritchard's telegraph was already on its way east. And somewhere in Philadelphia, Gerald Gray was waiting for the answer that he thought would finally give him what he wanted. And inside the ranch house, 2 people sat at a kitchen table and built the truth into something that could hold. She wrote until her hand cramped. He read every page as she finished it, asking questions she hadn't expected, catching the places where her legal reasoning needed to be simpler for a county land officer who wasn't her father. They worked without ceremony, without performance, 2 people doing what needed to be done in the time they had. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, she set down the pen and looked at what they had made. It was good. It was right. It was the kind of document her father would have nodded at and said carefully, "This will hold." She looked up and found Xander looking at her. "It's enough," she said. "More than enough," he said. She believed him, and sitting there in the lamplight with ink on her fingers and 3 weeks of Montana behind her, and Gerald Gray's reply somewhere in the dark between Philadelphia and here, Lillian Gray felt something she had not felt since before her father died, since before Thomas, since before she had learned to make herself small enough to survive. She felt like herself, not the survival version, not the careful armored pain-hiding version she had carried across 1,800 miles on a stagecoach with linen wound around her ribs. The real version, the one who knew land law and read people clearly and refused to stop fighting when the ground shifted under her. She pressed her hand flat on the paper she had written and breathed. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "Don't thank me." "I'm going to anyway." Something moved in his face, that warm contained thing she had been watching grow over 3 weeks. He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them looked away. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "We have a long day tomorrow." She nodded and stood and collected herself and walked to her room. She put her hand on the bolt and stopped. She stood there for a long moment with her hand on the bolt. She had stopped sliding every night the bolt she had slid automatically for the first week and had begun leaving more nights than not unlatched. Tonight, she left it. She crossed to the bed and lay down and closed her eyes, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not lie awake listening for sounds in the dark. Xander rode out before dawn. She heard him, the quiet efficiency of a man who had made his decision the night before and was simply executing it now. No hesitation, no second guessing. Boots across the floor, the soft close of the front door, Bear's tail thudding once on the porch in greeting, then silence. She lay still for a moment and listened to the ranch settle around her. Then she got up. She had work to do. The document they had built the night before was spread across the table, 12 pages in her handwriting. The legal argument laid out in clear sequential language that didn't rely on anyone's goodwill to understand. The creek provision. The survey's deliberate omission. The witness statements Xander would bring back from Dale. The chain of evidence that made Pritchard's fraud not just a suspicion, but a demonstrable fact. She read through it once more, with fresh eyes, the way her father had taught her. Read it like you've never seen it. Like you're the person who needs to be convinced. And she found two places where the language was softer than it needed to be, and sharpened them with 3 strokes of the pen. Then she sat back and looked at what they had made together and thought, this will hold. She made coffee. She waited. Morgenstund. Dale Calloway arrived with Xander at mid-morning, and he came through the door with the energy of a man who had been given a clear enemy and was enormously pleased about it. "Pritchard," Dale said, settling into a chair with the weight of a man who had opinions he'd been saving. "I've been waiting 8 months for someone to put that man in a corner. You tell me what you need, and I'll swear to it in front of God and the governor both." "Just the truth," Lillian said. Dale looked at her, a direct assessing look, the kind that was making up its mind. Then he nodded once. "Ruth said you knew what you were doing. Ruth's right more often than I tell her." She took his statement and the statements of 2 ranch hands who had worked the Nash property for 4 years, both of whom confirmed the creek ran year-round through every season they had witnessed. She wrote each one out in formal language and had each man sign it and had Xander and Dale witness the signatures. It took 2 hours. When she set the pen down after the last signature, she had a complete legal package, the kind her father would have taken to a judge without apology. "This goes to the land office in Billings," she said to Xander. "Not Pritchard's office, not the county registrar, directly to the territorial land commissioner, bypassing the local apparatus entirely." Xander looked at her. "Can we do that?" The 1862 provision gives any party in a disputed survey the right to appeal directly to the territorial commissioner if there is evidence of procedural fraud. Omitting a qualifying natural landmark isn't just a mistake, it's fraud on the face of the document. She looked at him steadily. "We can do that, and we should do it today before Pritchard gets a response from Philadelphia and decides to file something preemptive." Dale slapped his hand on the table. "I'll ride to Billings myself if you need a second body on it." "I need you here," Xander said, "as a witness in case Pritchard tries anything locally before the commissioner responds." He looked at Lillian. "I'll go. I can be in Billings by tomorrow morning if I ride through the afternoon." "Take Pete," she said. "Don't go alone." He looked at her just for a moment, the particular look she had come to know, the one that registered something without naming it. "All right," he said. "I'll take Pete." Dale left to give them a moment, finding something to occupy himself with Bear on the porch in the way of a man who understood when to make himself scarce. Xander stood at the table and looked at her across the pages. "If Gerald Gray's reply gets here while I'm gone," he started. "I can handle it," she said. "I know you can." He paused. "That's not what I was going to say." He picked up his hat. "I was going to say, if it gets here, and it's bad, don't run." "All right." She looked at him. "Lillian." His voice was quiet and direct. "Whatever it says, don't run." She understood what he was asking. He wasn't asking her to stay for the land case. He wasn't asking her to stay because she was useful. He was asking her to stay because he did not want to come back from Billings and find the bolt on the door permanently latched and the house empty of her. She felt that understanding move through her like something warm and terrifying. "I won't run," she said. He held her eyes for 1 moment longer than necessary. Then he put on his hat and went to find Pete. Dalek. Gerald Gray's reply arrived the following afternoon. She was in the kitchen when she heard the horse, and she was at the door before the rider had fully stopped. It was the telegraph boy from Town 17, apologetic in the way of someone delivering something he didn't write, and he handed her the folded paper, and was gone before she had fully unfolded it. She stood in the doorway and read it. It was exactly what she had expected, and worse than she had let herself imagine, which was its own kind of achievement. Gerald Gray had not wasted words. He had written to Pritchard. She could tell from the framing that this was not addressed to her, but to Pritchard, and the boy had been sent with a copy as a warning or a threat, and what Gerald had written was this: "The woman known as Lillian Gray, formerly wife of my late brother Thomas, is wanted for questioning in connection with Thomas's death. She left Philadelphia without notice and without the knowledge of the Gray family. Any person knowingly harboring her may find themselves in a complicated legal position. I am prepared to come west if necessary." She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it on the table and stood with her hands flat on the surface and breathed. Wanted for questioning. Not charged. Not accused formally. Wanted for questioning the language of a man who had nothing concrete and was building pressure with implication instead. May find themselves in a complicated legal position. A threat dressed as information. I am prepared to come west. The real message. The weight behind the paper. She picked up the document she had been keeping on her side of the table, the 12 pages, the witness statements, the legal argument, and she sat down and read it again from the beginning. Then she picked up the pen and added one more section at the end. 3 paragraphs precise and damaging, laying out the timeline. Thomas's death by cardiac failure, confirmed by a Philadelphia physician. Her injuries sustained before his death and documented by that same physician, and the Gray family's subsequent campaign of implication against a widow without resources, which she characterized in her father's language as an attempt to suppress witness testimony through intimidation and social pressure. She signed it with her full name. Lillian Ann Gray, formerly Lillian Ann Marsh. Daughter of Richard Marsh, attorney at law. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, deceased. She put the pen down and looked at what she had done. She had just made herself part of the legal record. She had just stepped out from behind the careful silence she had maintained for 6 weeks and put her name on a document that would go to the Territorial Land Commissioner of Montana and exist permanently in the public record. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat and waited for the shaking to stop. It stopped. She thought my father would have done the same thing. She thought I am still here. Xander came back from Billings the following evening, and she heard the horses from the kitchen and was at the door again before she could talk herself into appearing less eager. He came in covered in trail dust, Pete behind him, and he read her face in the first second and said, "What happened?" She handed him Gerald Gray's telegraph. He read it. She watched his face go through 3 things in rapid succession. Recognition, anger, and then a particular cold clarity that she had not seen from him before, the expression of a man who has been pushed past the place where he is trying to be measured. "He's threatening you," Xander said. "He's threatening you," she said. "Through me." That's how men like Gerald work. They don't come at you directly. They find the thing you care about and they lean on it. Xander set the paper down and looked at her. "You're not a thing I care about," he said. "You're a person I care about. There's a difference." She felt the words land in the precise place he had aimed them. "I added a section to the document," she said, "before you got back. I want you to read it." She handed him the updated pages. He read them standing up, the way he read everything he considered important standing, not sitting as if sitting would slow him down. When he reached the last 3 paragraphs, he went very still. "Lillian," he said, "it needed to be in there. You put your name on this." "Yes." "Gerald Gray will see this when it goes to the commissioner." "Yes." She looked at him directly. "Good. I want him to see it. I want him to understand that I am not hiding, and I am not running, and I have a legal record in Montana that predates whatever he's trying to build. If he comes here when he comes here, I want him walking into ground I have already claimed." Xander looked at her for a long moment. "The commissioner in Billings," he said. "I filed the challenge yesterday morning. The clerk who received it, I know him. He's a good man, fair. He told me they'll have a response within 10 days. And Lillian—" He paused. He looked at the creek provision argument. He looked at it right there in front of me. He said, and I'm giving you his exact words, "This is the strongest natural landmark claim I've seen filed in 4 years." She absorbed that. Let it settle. "That was your father's argument," Xander said. "You built it from what he taught you." "We built it," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You built it. I provided the land. You provided the law." She looked away because his face was doing something she wasn't sure she could receive fully, yet open and certain, and aimed entirely at her. "Go wash up," she said. "I made supper." Gerald Gray arrived in Montana City 9 days later. She had known he would come. She had prepared for it the same way she had prepared for the confession, not by rehearsing, but by clearing. By the time Ruth came to the door at 8 in the morning to tell her that a man in a Philadelphia suit had arrived at the hotel the night before and was asking for directions to the Nash Ranch, Lillian was already dressed and had already read through the complete legal file twice. "You don't have to see him," Ruth said. Her voice had the particular steel of a woman who had decided what she thought about this situation. "I know," Lillian said. "I'm going to see him anyway." Ruth looked at her. "You want me here when he comes?" "Yes," Lillian said. "And Dale too if he can come. I want witnesses." Ruth was already reaching for her coat. Chog. Gerald Gray arrived at the ranch at 10 o'clock in a hired buggy, wearing a dark suit that was absolutely wrong for Montana in November, and absolutely right for a man who wanted you to understand where he came from. He was 50 lean with Thomas's eyes, but none of Thomas's charm, which made him more honest and more dangerous in equal measure. He came through the door. Xander held it neutral and watchful, and he stopped when he saw Lillian sitting at the table with Ruth on her left and Dale's bulk visible in the doorway to the kitchen. She watched him recalibrate, watched him take in the room and understand that this was not the scene he had prepared for, not a frightened woman alone, not an easy confrontation. He had expected to find her isolated. He found her anchored. "Lillian," he said. "Gerald," she said. "Sit down." He looked at Xander. Xander pulled out a chair across the table and said nothing. Gerald sat. "I'll be direct," he said. "It's in your interest to come back to Philadelphia and answer questions about Thomas's death. Voluntarily is better for you than the alternative." "What alternative?" she said. "I have the resources to make this complicated for everyone in this room." "You have resources," she agreed. "What you don't have is evidence. Thomas died of cardiac failure. That is documented by Dr. Emmanuel Holt of Philadelphia, who signed the death certificate. The stairs have nothing to do with his heart stopping." She kept her voice level and her hand still. "What you have is grief and money and the need to blame someone. I understand all three, but they are not a legal case, Gerald." His jaw tightened. "You left without—" "I left because your family made it clear I was not safe," she said. "I left because I had 3 broken ribs and no money, and no one in Philadelphia was going to listen to a widow against the Gray family's account of events." She paused. "That is also documented. My injuries, the physician's report, all of it. You could have come to us, Gerald." Her voice sharpened, just slightly, just enough. "Your brother pushed me down a flight of stairs and stepped over my body on the floor. You know this. I know you know it because Thomas told you everything. He told you about the fights the way he told you about all of it, and you let it continue for 3 years because it was easier to look away." She looked at him directly. "I am not asking you to feel guilty for that. I am telling you that I know what I know, and I have written it into the legal record of the territory of Montana, and if you pursue this further, that record becomes public." The room was very quiet. Gerald Gray looked at her across the table. She watched something move across his face. Not remorse, not exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has traveled very far for a confrontation and arrived to find the other person is not who they were when he left. "The land case," he said. "A different angle. A man regrouping. Your husband has a land dispute with a local official. My husband has filed a legally documented fraud claim against the deputy registrar of this county," she said, "which is with the Territorial Land Commissioner in Billings as of 6 days ago. Mr. Pritchard's communication with you, which we are aware of, will be included in the supplemental file we send next week, as evidence of his willingness to use personal intimidation in a land dispute." Gerald looked at Xander. Xander looked back at him with the particular calm of a man who has nothing to hide and knows it. "This isn't what I came here for," Gerald said. I know what you came here for, Lillian said. You came here to remind me that I was small and alone, and that your family's name could follow me anywhere. She kept her eyes on his face. I'm not small and I'm not alone. I'm sorry it took so long for that to be true. But it is true now. A silence stretched through the room. Gerald Gray picked up his hat from the table where he'd set it. He stood. He looked at her one more time, and this time, what she saw in his face was something she hadn't expected. Something closer to recognition than anger. The look of a man seeing something clearly, possibly for the first time. Thomas was not a good man, Gerald said quietly. I know that. She held very still. I'm not going to say I handled it correctly, he said. I'm not going to say that. He looked at his hat. But I needed someone to be responsible. That was wrong of me. It was not an apology. It was not enough. She was not going to pretend it was either of those things. But it was more than she had expected from Gerald Gray, and she received it for what it was. Go home, Gerald, she said. There's nothing for you here. He put his hat on and walked to the door. Xander held it. Gerald paused on the threshold and looked back once at her, not at Xander, not at the room, and then he was gone. The Territorial Land Commissioner's ruling arrived 11 days later. It came in a formal envelope addressed to Xander Nash, and he brought it in from the post and set it on the table in front of her without opening it, because they both understood without discussing it that this was something they would open together. She slit the envelope. She read it. She read it twice. The fraudulent survey has been invalidated, she said. A new survey is ordered. Pritchard has been referred to the Territorial Attorney General's office for review of his conduct. She looked up. The 22 acres are yours. Xander sat back in his chair and put both hands over his face and breathed. She watched him. She watched the 8 months of fighting leave his body all at once. Not dramatically, just a long exhale, a loosening in the shoulders. The relief of a man who has been carrying something heavy for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. When he lowered his hands, his eyes were bright in a way she had not seen before. We did that, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at her across the table, the lamp between them. The 12 pages of her handwriting stacked to one side. The map with the creek line marked in pencil, the landmark that Pritchard had erased, and she had put back. I want to ask you something, he said. His voice was different, stripped of the practical urgency that had structured the last 2 weeks quieter, more careful. Ask, she said. This. He gestured a small movement that she understood meant not just the table and the document, but the whole of it, the 3 weeks, the coffee on the right side, the long route through the aspens, the night she had told him everything, and he had asked how long, and she had fallen apart in a way she had never fallen apart in front of anyone. This is not what I advertised for. When I wrote to the agency, I wrote for a woman who could help with the ranch and the household. I didn't write for... He stopped. I didn't know to write for this. She looked at him. What is this? A partner, he said, simply. Someone who sits at this table and fights for the same ground I'm fighting for. Someone who makes the coffee better than I do and reads people in 30 seconds and has her father's law books in her head and... He stopped again. Someone I would like to spend a very long time sitting across this table from if she'll let me. She pressed her lips together. Xander, she said. I know, he said. I know it soon, and I know what you've been through, and I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I'm just telling you what I feel, because you told me once that you'd rather be asked straight than have someone tiptoeing around something, and I've been tiptoeing around this for 2 weeks. She looked at him. She looked at this man who had built a lower shelf while she slept and taken the rough road and said nothing. That happened to you is your fault and meant every word of it. This man who had stood at that table at 2 a.m. making coffee while she wrote law into existence, this man who had asked her not to run. She thought about survival and what it cost. She thought about the bolt on the door she had stopped latching. She thought about Bear and the aspens and the creek on the map and the 22 acres that were won. She thought about what it meant to stop merely surviving and begin carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost to choose. "I'm not going to tell you I'm not afraid," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you not to be. I'm going to need time, real time, not performance of time, actual time." "I have time," he said. "We're in Montana. Time is the one thing we have plenty of." She almost laughed. It almost came out a real laugh, not performed, just genuine, and she caught it, but not entirely. He saw it. That warm, contained expression moved across his face and stayed this time. "All right," she said. "All right," he repeated, making sure of the meaning. "All right," she said again clearly. Yes. He nodded once. He did not leap across the table. He did not perform relief or joy. He just looked at her with an expression that she had no word for, except certain a man who had decided something and was simply glad to have it confirmed. He reached across the table and set his hand palm up between the maps and the legal pages and the coffee cups. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put her hand in his. His fingers closed, not gripping, not pulling, just closing, the way you close your hand around something you intend to keep. The doctor came to the ranch the following week. Xander had arranged it without being asked, had simply come in one evening and said, Dr. Garner from town could come Thursday, if that was all right with her. And she had looked at him for a long moment and said yes. Dr. Garner was 60 and unhurried, and examined her with the same careful efficiency as Dr. Haynes in Philadelphia, and when he was done, he looked at her over his spectacles and said, "Whoever wrapped these the second time did a good job. You healed better than I'd expect for this kind of injury." "I had good conditions for healing," she said. He nodded, wrote something in his book, and told her she was cleared for full activity, to take it gradually, to come back in a month. He shook her hand on the way out. She stood in the kitchen after he left and pressed her hand against her side, the old reflex, the 6 weeks of constant monitoring, and felt nothing. No grinding, no burning, no white flash, just her ribs, solid, healed, hers. She breathed in fully deep the way she hadn't been able to breathe since January, and felt her chest expand, without resistance, without pain, without the constant reminder of what had been done to her. She breathed out. Xander was in the doorway. "Well," he said. "Cleared," she said. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to contain. Relief, and something larger than relief, the particular emotion of a man who has been watching someone he cares about carry pain and is now watching them set it down. "Good," he said. His voice was slightly rougher than usual. "Don't make it a production," she said. "I'm not making it a production. You have a very expressive face for a man who doesn't say much. I've been told," he said. And he smiled fully without catching it. This time, the whole thing landing on his face like something he'd decided not to hold back, and she felt it in her chest, in the precise place where the ache used to live. Winter came down hard on the valley that year, the way Montana winters do, without apology, without negotiation. The ranch closed in around them, the world narrowed to the house and the barn, and the distance between them, and they lived it together the way people live. Hard seasons, practically honestly close. Ruth came when the roads allowed and declared herself satisfied with the state of things, without specifying what state she meant. Dale came with her and fixed the bunkhouse roof, and ate supper at their table, and told his story about the horse in the vegetable garden again, and they let him because it was a good story. Pete stayed on for the winter. The other ranch hands came and went. The land commissioner's office sent a crew to conduct the new survey of the east boundary, and the 22 acres were formally recorded in Xander Nash's name in December, and Lillian filed the paperwork herself at the county office and walked back to the wagon in the cold Montana air, feeling something she did not have a word for in any language she knew. Pritchard resigned his position in early December. No charges were formally filed. The Territorial Attorney General's review concluded without arrest, but Pritchard was gone, and the new deputy registrar was a young woman from Missoula who Ruth reported was famously difficult to bribe. Gerald Gray did not write. He did not come back. She thought about him sometimes not with hatred, which she had decided was too expensive to maintain, but with the particular clarity of someone who has looked directly at a thing that frightened them and found it smaller than expected. Gerald Gray was a man who had protected his family's name at the cost of his brother's widow's safety, and he would have to carry that in whatever way he carried it, and it was no longer her problem to solve. She had enough to build. On the last day of December, she found him at the table with a new piece of paper and a pen, and when she looked over his shoulder, she saw he was writing a letter. "Who to?" she said. "The agency," he said. "The one I wrote to originally." He paused. "I want to tell them I want to recommend they send people here, to Montana, to the West." He set down the pen. "I want to tell them that it works, that it can work, if people come honestly." She looked at the letter. She looked at the side of his face. "Did we come honestly?" she said. He thought about it. "Eventually," he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He turned and looked at her with that expression she had stopped trying to name, the warm, certain, entirely deliberate expression of a man looking at the thing he has chosen. "Happy New Year," she said. "Happy New Year, Lillian." She sat down across from him, and they finished the letter together, the way they finished most things now, each one bringing what they had, building something better than either could build alone in a kitchen with a lower shelf and a lamp between them, and outside the Montana, dark, enormous, and cold, and full of stars. She had come to this place broken, afraid, carrying a secret she could barely hold. She had come believing she was arriving at her last chance or no chance at all. What she had found instead was the only thing that had ever been worth finding: a man who built her a bolt before he knew her face, who asked how long when she needed to be asked, who stood beside her while she wrote the truth into the record and refused to look away from any part of it. She had found ground that was hers, work that was hers, a name she had signed to something permanent and real. And in the end, what saved Lillian Gray was not rescue, it was recognition. The moment someone looked at her fully, without flinching, without conditions, and said, "I see you. All of it. And I'm not going anywhere." That was the thing that could not be taken from her now. That was the thing that was finally, completely, irrevocably hers.